Smith and Rogan are irked when Murray expresses his befuddlement that Smith has become a prominent voice in the debate about Israel and Palestine without ever having visited the Middle East. The shock at the idea that someone ought to see things with their own eyes before commenting on them is palpable.
Have you been there?
Right, that's a good point.
You haven't been?
By the way, how is he in all these wars? Can I just go to wars? By the way, how are you allowed to just go to wars? Is that the way
you should at least
can you just
have the
go to
courtesy of going there.
Can I just go to wars, or do I have to come back and say what people want me to say about the wars?
The problem with modern media is there are now continual bulwarks. You get rid of Joe Rogan, you got to deal with Candace Owens. You get rid of Candace Owens, you got Ian Carroll. You get rid of Ian Carroll, you got me. You get rid of me, you got to deal with Lex Friedman. You get rid of Lex Friedman, you got to deal with Daddy of them all, Alex Jones. How are they going to control, smear, shut down every single one of those pundits? You get rid of Crowder, you get rid of Tim Pool. How are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? And ultimately, it's more important. You guys are more important. You are the people that matter. So in a way, whatever you talk about in the Rumble chat, you're a Zionist, you're an anti-Semite, it doesn't really make any difference. Even issues as significant as Israel and Israel's power, even issues as significant as the Russia-Ukraine war, even issues as significant as Epstein's power, fade when compared to the spiritual war that I believe we're in now.
So since I put out that episode last week where I said that there's a cancellation attempt against Rogan and a deplatforming attempt against Dave Smith and Daryl Cooper, there has been a firestorm, and everyone is now engaging in this conversation. So take a little victory lap for myself there. I identified this before anybody, as best I can tell. I'm sure some of you identified it at the same time I did. But in terms of commentators, I was definitely on the front lines with this one. And I think the reason that I was able to catch it is just simply because these are my people, because I'm a huge fan of, obviously, Dave. He's a friend, and Rogan, and I've followed them forever. And I've followed the news backlash to these things very consistently for a very long time. I can sense when people are doing things that are reputationally damaging, there's usually a catalyst for that. What is that catalyst? And if it's not evident, well, then it's probably hidden. And if it's hidden, then it's probably ops. Show the logical chain there. So I think that's what we're witnessing, but I want to go through some of the responses because this has been a tremendous opportunity to distill who is worth listening to and following moving forward, in my opinion. And I think someone who's risen, well, there has been tons of figures that have fallen over the past week. One of the figures that I'm very fond of that has risen to the occasion is Bret Weinstein. And he has put out a video, which I'll play for you in a second. But before I do that, I want to talk about a little bit about why I think Douglas Murray, setting aside the actual argument, and just talk about the tone and delivery and why it doesn't land with an American audience, particularly a Joe Rogan audience. There is something very different culturally between Americans and the Brits. They have a class structure that is much more prominent than the way we look at things. Certainly we still have, class here, but it's just that's not how we decipher truth from fiction. And I think that the reason that someone like Rogan rose to such high levels of popularity and listenership is because he doesn't rely on class. He doesn't rely on credentialism. He's just, do you have an argument? Okay. You're a comic and you want to talk about Israel-Palestine? Okay, let's do it. Let's see if your argument stands up. Oh, you're a comic and you have an argument about a foreign war? Well, how about I bring in an alleged expert on that, like Douglas Murray, and see if you can hold your own? I think what rubs the Brits the wrong way, and I've realized this after listening to both Konstantin Kisin and Douglas Murray and Carl Benjamin, a.k.a. Sargon of Akkad, is that they definitely ascribe greater value to those that wear a suit and speak in a posh accent and come from an upper class background, went to Oxford or Cambridge or whatever. I think that that's not how Americans really view things, and I think that it's increasingly the opposite of how Americans view things. Like if you're talking to somebody who went to a state school or Harvard or Yale, you're probably going to be more doubtful of the legitimacy of the claims that comes from someone who was indoctrinated to the Ivy League. At least, people in this audience for sure. At least I am. I don't take your credentials seriously at all. you're going to have to demonstrate to me that like you're actually a free thinker, you're a critical thinker, you're intelligent. I could have gotten through Harvard easily, but does that make me smart? Well, I guess you could say that it makes me smart because I could have done it easily, but that doesn't make me right? Like that's the key here. We're trying to find truth. And Konstantin Kisin will sit there in very, very nicely lit recording studio, and he sits there and he stares dead into the camera, and he talks very eloquently, and he wears a suit, and his hair is done up, and it's just like, it's all a delivery that is trying to ascribe legitimacy to his claims when the arguments aren't actually present. And the opposite is true for someone like Rogan or Dave Smith or myself. I'm sitting here in a t-shirt and a beanie. I don't have any lights on. I'm just ambient light from outside, and that's it. And I expect you to actually listen to what I have to say and decide if I'm right or wrong. And I think that that's a much more American way of analyzing these things, particularly after the media has proven itself to be disreputable. They've lied to us for decades, and they've gotten us into so many wars and, I mean, lockdowns, everything they do. They basically led us into a near race war in the summer of 2020. So, they have rightfully lost our trust. So what we're looking for is not honorifics. It's not credentials. It's not even wealth or evidence of success. You know, do you drive a Ferrari or whatever? It's honesty, sincerity, authenticity. Are you for real? Doesn't necessarily mean you're right, but that's kind of a prerequisite to being right, is that you're at least trying to tell the truth. And I think that's what has made Dave Smith rise to such heights and to such high heights so recently, is that it's so obvious that he's authentic in what he's talking about. It doesn't mean he's right about everything, but as I said, that's the prerequisite to whether or not he's worth listening to. And I think Bret Weinstein is a good example of this when it comes to the more credentialed academic version of a Dave Smith. He's not going to sit there in a t-shirt necessarily, and he's not going to drop F-bombs or make jokes very often, but it's obvious that he's being his authentic self. He's a very slow-speaking, deep-thinking guy, and he takes in new information and he contrasts it with his previous assumptions on a topic, and then he basically cross-references the two, and he says, okay, I'm going to drop these previous ideas that I was holding and pushing to my audience, and now I'm going to uplift these new ideas, and I'm going to kind of integrate them into my worldview. And I think that's all most people are asking for. You don't have to drop F-bombs. You don't have to dress like a schlub either. But are you actually reconsidering new information as new information comes to light? And this good example of this was Bret Weinstein early on in the lockdowns. Some people say that he supported the lockdowns. I didn't follow his show closely back then, but he did have some photos of him wearing a mask and big goggles, and he's been dragged mercilessly for that. But I don't feel that way. Particularly if you're doing it in the late February, early March timeframe when Fauci and others were saying you don't need these things, and for him to still be thinking critically and thinking freely and to kind of contrarian, but maybe right, is to go, well, we don't know what this is, so I'm going to take precautions. I don't have any problem with that. And if you, as new information comes out and you realize, oh, this isn't efficacious, well, I'm going to drop it. And I'm going to notify my audience. I think that this is all bad guidance that you're getting from HHS, Fauci, et cetera. And he did that consistently for the past 5 years. And that's how you earn respect. It's not about credentials, it's about track record. And Douglas Murray, as I've demonstrated so many times, I'm not going to recap it, but this guy has advocated every single war that we've been in, and they've all been disastrous. And I don't give a shit that you went to Oxford. I don't care that you wrote 4 or 5 books. You've been wrong about the biggest issues time and time and time again, to the detriment of my country. Why should I not hold you accountable for that? Well, on the inverse of that is, did you get the biggest issues right? Bret Weinstein has, at least in recent memory. That's to his credit. And he deserves, despite the fact that I think he also supported Andrew Yang, which I find to be insane and totally counter to my political worldview. I'm still going to forgive that because that's a difference of opinion That's not so much being wrong on the issues as much as having a different perspective on political solutions. He's more left-leaning. He's going to advocate for more left-leaning solutions. But he's still being honest. He's still seeking truth. And I won't talk out of school here, but after I posted something saying, I'm left wondering if the IDW, the intellectual dark web, was subverted or if it was created from its inception to basically curtail the non-interventionist right when it comes to foreign policy. And a lot of people got upset with me about that because, they're saying, well, these are all former lefties. Like, how would they possibly curtail the right? Well, let me explain. These are still very influential figures that became extraordinarily prominent, largely because of their relationship to Joe Rogan and their continuous access to enormous audiences for a 4, 5, 6 year period. Yes, they're the moderate lefties, but they come over, they get this huge platform, and they start to talk about, like, we don't agree with this Overton window. This is the new Overton window, but this Overton window includes within it empire. It includes within it our greatest ally and continuing foreign intervention. A lot of people got upset about it, as I said, but I'll tell you, without disclosing anything that would violate privacy, I got a text message from Bret Weinstein. And I'm not going to say what he said to me, but let's just say he is also viewing what's happening now, and he's concerned by it. And instead of telling you what he talked to me about, I'm just going to play you his clip because it basically gets to the point, and it's also public information, so I won't be talking out of school. Let's check it out.
The mechanism by which we discovered it is well known. It is the exact thing that the founders of this great country put first on the list of our enumerated rights for a goddamn reason. It was, they couldn't name a podcast. They couldn't have called out Joe Rogan, but they came as close as they could come to saying, sorry, there's no source of high quality information versus low quality information, malinformation, disinformation. You can't know ahead of time. The mechanism by which you come to understand what is true, Douglas, is discussion. It is discussion in which nobody gets to set the rules about what kinds of opinions can be investigated. And yes, that does cause some garbage stuff to be said, but what reveals that it's garbage stuff? Free and open inquiry that reveals that actually it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. That's how you do it, Konstantin Kisin. I don't know what's wrong with these people. It's really like somebody has figured out how to threaten them into saying things that they full well know aren't true.
They're becoming what they were fighting against.
They're becoming what they were fighting against. And I must say, in both of those cases, I feel like I don't think I was duped to begin with, that they actually held free speech as a high value. So the fact that they are backing away from it and calling for some kind of standard, self-imposed or otherwise, to prevent certain, the fact is, heterodoxy is heterodoxy. And it often sounds crazy, and most of it is. But the good stuff is the stuff that sounds crazy that then does strangely stand up to scrutiny. That's how you figure out what's coming, is you look at the heterodox stuff and you figure out what has predictive power. And you can't get around that. And the people who tried failed.
Kudos. Tremendously well said. And I could not agree more. And I think in some ways the reason that Bret has become such a stalwart advocate for free speech and open debate is that his origin story was getting kicked off of Evergreen College and being threatened by the woke mob, and that left an indelible mark on him, at least as best I can tell. And I think essentially what he conveyed in that message of Dark Horse podcast is what we talked about privately, and I think it's obviously just true. Like, who were the heterodox thinkers back in 2021? Dr. Peter McCullough. Like some legitimate experts, but they were heterodox in that moment of kind of cult, just groupthink psychosis. Dr. Robert Malone, a bunch of guys that have been proven empirically to be far closer to the truth than the so-called experts. And this is the value of the podcast sphere. And this is the value of the Joe Rogan podcast writ large, is that he enables large audiences to hear and consider what are heterodox ideas when it matters most. And if you don't do that, well, then, in my opinion, you're doing your audience a disservice, trusting that your audience will be intelligent enough to decipher truth from fiction, or at least take in ideas, consider them, and then do further research to establish whether or not they are accurate. What's even more galling about this, though, is that Douglas Murray is sitting right across the table from this guy who he believes to be a smear merchant or a deceptive figure in Dave Smith. Then just call him on the bullshit right then and there. Lay it all out. You have an opportunity that Dave and I would just dream of to call you out on your bullshit, but you're sitting right there and you can't do it in real time. Seems a little odd, doesn't it? So it's not as if they're critiquing Rogan for having on Dave Smith by himself, which sure you could argue, well, he's only platforming people that have these crazy ideas. He's never having on, but that's not true either. He has on Douglas Murray. Just the week prior, he had on Konstantin Kisin, which, by the way, has no credentials outside of what Dave Smith does. He's a stand-up comic. So why should you be platformed, Konstantin? Shouldn't we only listen to you when it comes to comedy? You talk about everything. You talk about the war in Ukraine. You've debated Dave on the war in Ukraine. But the truth is that it's not about credentials. It's about gatekeeping and only permitting a certain narrative. And that certain narrative is obviously intervention on behalf of a country in the Middle East. Time and time again, this is the tie that binds. Every single figure that has come out aggressively, including Michael Rappaport, who had this to say.
But Joe Rogan, be like, it's an open discussion. You know, we're just floating ideas. We're not married to them being facts or not facts, and they don't have to be experts. We're having a talk. We're just having a talk. I'm smoking a cigar. Sometimes I smoke weed. We're just talking. That's Joe Rogan's theory. And it's great for everything, except for facts. It's great for everything, except for people that are disparaging week after week, podcast after podcast, and not telling the truth and the reality of what has happened October 7th and beyond. So you bring on one scumbag after the next scumbag, and they say, well, I'm not an expert. I'm a comedian. I'm not an expert, but I know this. I'm not an expert on Hitler, but I'm not an expert on Churchill, but I'm not an expert on the conflict in the Middle East, but here's all of my thoughts. I'm a comedian, but we're not going to do any jokes. We're not going to talk comedy. I'm just going to expound on all my thought.
Yet another example of a comedian and actor who's talking out of school. Live by your own rules. Shut the fuck up. Stop talking about this. Right? I mean, why are you an authority as to who's able to talk about this stuff? If you can't talk about it either, why are you talking about it? How do you know what the truth is? He claims that Dave Smith isn't telling the truth. All these lying motherfuckers. Like, okay, well, then how do you know what the truth is? Aren't you just a stand-up comic? Are you an expert? Like, this is the point, is that you can't just assume that someone's an expert because they say they are. Dave Smith repeatedly says, I'm not an expert. But the truth is, if you want to be really honest about it, Dave's about as close to an expert on that conflict as you'll find. Like, listen to the guy. He has read, I don't know, dozens of books on the issue. I'm not saying that makes him an expert, but compared to the general public, he's damn close. Damn close. And compared to Douglas Murray, obviously closer. I mean, explain to me how Douglas Murray has been to Ukraine and been to Israel, and yet he gets things wrong over and over again. Oh, the Ukrainians are about to win this war. Just need to continue to give them aid. They'll be pushing the Russians out within months, weeks even. It's a lie. It's a lie. So his lived experience didn't amount to shit. But that's not the point. It's not about credentials. It's not about expertise. It's about crafting and maintaining a narrative and an Overton window that leaves people like the non-interventionist right wing out of the conversation. We don't want a guy like Dave Smith having an audience of 15 million people because it's damaging to what we want to see happen. That's all this is. That's all it is. Because if it was just about challenging his bad ideas, you had the biggest opportunity in the world to do so. You sat there with the guy for 3 hours. The fact that you got beat up is not Dave's fault. That's yours. You didn't bring any facts to offset. Like Rappaport just keeps saying, it's about facts. It's not just, oh, sure, you can have an opinion, but no, when it comes to facts, Dave has the facts, people. He's not making it up. You can disagree with his conclusion, but in terms of the facts that he's bringing, leaked State Department cables and Smotrich and Netanyahu and all of these other reporting from Israeli reporting outlets, sure, argue that all of that's wrong or the conclusion is wrong, that's fine. But he's not making that stuff up. And the reason that you know that is because there is no hit pieces circulating that demonstrate that Dave is lying. None. Try and find one. The clip that goes viral over and over again is just, Dave hasn't been there. You've never been? That's it. There's no breakdown. There's no challenging of actually the points that he brings up, which should be easy to do if he's such a liar, if he's such an idiot. But no one's done it because they can't, because it's an impenetrable case. I just want to really emphasize that point. It's not about expertise or credentials. It's that Dave is fucking right. He is right about this. And why does it matter that Dave Smith is right? Well, because his argumentation is convincing a lot of his buddies who are extraordinarily influential, like Tim Dillon, like Joe Rogan, list goes on, that maybe we shouldn't continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with a country as they destroy their neighbor.
Deporting them because they've been critical of a foreign government seems to feed the conspiracy theories that the United States is acting and doing things at the behest of Israel. What you want to do, if you're creating a political culture, you want to try to prevent people from drifting to the extremes.
Rogan's got an audience of 15 million. I don't know how many people listen to Tim Dillon, but it's got to be a couple million at least. And this shouldn't be surprising to people. These guys are at their core. To be a good comic, you have to be interested in truth, and then unspeakable truths particularly are things that you want to, if you want to be cutting edge, you want to bring those up. You want to push the envelope. You want to see where that line is. But also, stand-up comics value tremendously free speech. Of course, their career depends on it. They've also all dealt with censorship and blacklisting and deplatforming threats and strikes and everything else. So they very much care about free speech. So when they see these laws or these deportation regimes that are focused on the words of protesters, like that is obviously going to draw their ire. Whether they agree with the protest or not, that's not the point. The point is, do you have a right to speak freely? Now, this is a slightly different situation because we're largely talking about people that are either, immigrants or on green cards is what most of the controversy is about, because they're legally here. So if you're legally here, are you then protected by the Constitution? There's some debate about that. I would say probably. So it seems to me that the problem is not that Dave Smith is lying on a large platform, but Dave Smith is telling the truth on the biggest platform in the world, and he is reaching more and more influential guys who are going to spread this same message to their audience, and therefore sirens go off. Problem. This has to stop. And as I opened up the show with Russell Brand, he's pointing out that you're not going to be able to get all of them. It's like, okay, so you take out Dave, well, then you got Scott, and you got Tom, and you got me, then you got da-da-da. Or you take out Rogan, then you got Russell Brand, then you got Ian Carroll, then you got da-da-da-da-da. Jimmy Dore. I mean, there's so many people that are all basically in this world now, and they all have such enormous audiences. Well, you can't really stop all of them unless you go full, tyrannical, shut down the internet style. I mean, which isn't an impossibility, unfortunately. So the angle that they're taking is that they're going to try and increase the pain if you get outside of this kind of forced Overton window, where they say, sure, have on people that Rogan's a great example of this too, because he has on Eddie Bravo and Sam Tripoli, and they're talking wild shit. I mean, talking, fake moon landing and flat Earth and all this other stuff. JFK and every conspiracy you could possibly think of, they've talked about. There's no controversy. No one talks about that. What are the two times that Rogan has been attempted to be canceled? I'll give them to you. There's two. One, because he had on a bunch of doctors that said that the lockdown regime and the mandates and everything else was insane and inefficacious, and it had to stop. And they're like, whoa, problem. You're going up against the regime's narrative here. What's the second time? Well, he's had on Daryl Cooper and Dave Smith, and they're talking about the kind of foundational premise by which our empire was established. World War II, the hagiography around it, the kind of flowery, pure good versus evil story that we're all supposed to just believe and espouse consistently, despite the fact that millions and millions and millions of people died. And it's obviously tragic, and any war has complicated factors that you ought to consider, especially if you want to avoid it. But if you actually question it, well, then it kind of defeats the whole argument that every dictator has to be stopped now, lest we end up in another world war, because then you'd understand that, oh, it was actually the Allies were doing XYZ that was bad too. And this is actually much more complicated. And then, in fact, Putin probably isn't going to roll across Europe. So, like, that foundational narrative matters a lot, which is why they don't like Daryl Cooper. The reason they don't like Dave Smith is because, one, and this is just the truth, he's Jewish, so it's really hard to call him an anti-Semite as he's saying, hey, maybe we don't need to continue to blow out our deficit and our national debt to defend and fight a bunch of wars for a country that isn't America. And they're like, oh, normally we just call you a slur and then we move on, but both your parents are Jewish? You sure one of them's not? No, they both are. Yeah, real problem. Real fucking problem, huh? So that's the reason that Dave Smith had the pain threshold has to be cranked up on Rogan so that he stops having on Daryl Cooper and Dave Smith. And if he stops, well, then maybe Jimmy Dore stops. Maybe these other people that are all looking around and going, I'd like to talk to these guys. They seem interesting, but I don't want to deal with, potential for a strike or have op-eds written about me. And it's just not worth the headache. So this is kind of a soft power as opposed to a state-based power where it actually becomes overtly censorious, where they actually are striking you down or banning you or deplatforming you. And I think that's what we're witnessing. And the reason I feel that way is because my Twitter feed is just filled with Israeli flag, Dave Smith, idiot, here's Douglas Murray, God, King, legend, man. And that's it. And they're small accounts, but they've got huge activity. And it just looks like an op to me. As I've said before, can I prove it? No, I can't prove it. But I just once you've been in this world long enough, you sense when things aren't organic. I'll give a good example. I was one of the first people that identified when there was a bunch of conservative influencers that were aggressively pushing that Coca-Cola products, that soda, beverages, ought to be included in SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, I think is what the acronym stands for. And I'm like, wait. Your conservative influencers arguing like over what food stamps ought to be able to buy? What? I'm like, you're damaging your reputation with this. So something's up. And I was right. And then there was a quick investigation and someone actually proved out, yeah, these dudes are getting paid for it. They're lying to their audiences. They're paid operatives. Is it so far-fetched to believe that if there's paid operatives that dictate whether or not soda is included in welfare benefits, that there might be paid operatives that try and curtail messaging that says, hey, maybe we shouldn't continue to fight foreign wars that have bankrupted us? Does that seem like a stretch? Do you think that Coca-Cola and Pepsi, et cetera, have a larger marketing and lobbying budget than the military-industrial complex? Do I have to make myself any more clear than this? Of course there's a fucking marketing and lobbying budget. Of course they deplatform. And if you think they don't go harder than that, if you think that they don't take people out that oppose wars, well, you just got to go back through history. There's plenty of examples, folks. So, I rest my case. I think that there's an operation being ran, and I think that it's essentially a pressure campaign that's trying to turn down the volume on Dave Smith. Here's the beautiful thing. It's doing the exact opposite. This is Streisand effect all day. And what's even better is it is now, as I said earlier, it has distilled who's worth listening to. Should you take Sam Harris or Konstantin Kisin or Douglas Murray or any of these guys seriously on really anything moving forward? Well, that's for you to decide. But I'll tell you personally, I'm going to take them with a grain of salt because I don't think that they're sincere actors. I think that they are basically hired guns. Why should I take them seriously moving forward? On the inverse of that, as I said, it distills who should be listened to as well, not just who shouldn't be. And I think Bret Weinstein has risen to the occasion, and he ought to grow in influence and grow an audience. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this entire ecosystem. And this is actually the beautiful thing about open dialogue and debate, is that it enables us as an audience, because sure, I'm a podcaster, but I'm also a fan of podcasts and I listen to them tremendously, like a lot, is that this is what we as an audience ought to be doing, is we ought to be actually checking the track record of the people that we listen to. And if they lead you astray time and time again, well, then fucking stop listening to them. Like, there's so many options. That's the cool thing about the free market. That's the cool thing about a competitive marketplace of ideas. Who is best at this? The reason I'm like, a lot of people think that, you know, I go hard in the paint and I defend Dave Smith because he's helped my career or something, or because he's my friend. It's like, sure, that's certainly the friend part is true. Because he's helped my career is not the reason. Just being honest, it's not. Like, the reason I defend Dave so aggressively is because he's been right about everything for a decade. That's why. And this is the same reason I've never even met Joe Rogan. I still very much defended him when CNN was making his face jaundiced and saying he's on XYZ drugs and he's killing people with his mis and disinformation. I defended Joe Rogan not because it was going to help my career. I could have never even dreamt of being on his show at that time. Not because he's my friend, but because I recognize value in what he does. Because it's valuable to an audience to have open dialogue with sometimes contrarian or heterodox views that help me distill the truth for myself before the expert class permits it to be known to the general public. And I've done that time and time again as a consequence of that. So, as I said, that's the main reason I go hard in the paint for Dave Smith. Yes, I'm a loyal friend, and yes, I would defend him. Even if I thought he was wrong, I'd probably defend him, but not nearly as aggressively as I have been, because he is fucking right. That's the reason I go hard in the paint. And that's the reason everybody that is a fan of Dave Smith ought to be doing the same. And I know that sounds kind of like cult, defend your guy thing, but like, when you see an operation that's being ran by a bunch of very influential people, I mean, these are not like small timers. These are million follower accounts, hundreds of thousands of viewers and listeners and blah, blah, blah. And they're all besmirching his name. And they're all not making an argument. They're all just lying. So I think it's really important. Like, we're in an information war. That's what this is. And they're also deploying bot networks and everything else. So it's like, yeah, let's show organic support for our guys. So I'd do the same thing if they were coming after Scott Horton, because he's right about everything. And yes, he's also my friend. That's not the reason, though. It's because he's right about everything. And the message matters. And they're lying. So why shouldn't we engage in this? Why shouldn't we get in the trenches? Like, this is an information war. Fucking back up your people. You don't need to call for reinforcements. I'm already there. And what did Tim Dillon say? He said, deporting them for criticizing a foreign government seems to feed into the conspiracy theories that the United States is doing things on the behest of Israel, or at the behest of Israel. It's like, we are. Donald Trump is. It's just the truth. It's not anti-Semitic. Dave Smith would say it too. Do you think that he hates himself as a consequence? No. He's just for real America first. That's it. So am I. I can open up every single discussion about Israel and its influence in America, and I could start it by saying, love Jewish people. And I do. Got no beef. Bret Weinstein, love him. Dave Smith, love him. lots of Jewish friends growing up too. I've got no beef. But I don't like having a foreign country that influences my nation. And I don't like having a foreign country, whatever country it is, that bankrupts my country or sacrifices tens of thousands of my fellow Americans' lives. I don't like it. Oh, might I add, I also don't like killing millions of innocent people. So I don't care what the religion of your fucking country is. I don't give a shit about that. What I care about is the influence is creating evil. It's creating evil actions. And I want to stop it. And I have to talk about that honestly, or I should just hang it up. There's no reason for me to be doing this if I can't just tell you the truth. That's the truth. I want to stop doing that. And I have to acknowledge the catalyst for those misguided decisions. And I don't think that it's a secret anymore. I've shown you the clips. Netanyahu talking to our Congress for decades. Decades. Iran's days away. And the reason I think that there's a grander op, and I've already explained this in the prior episode, but now, over the past 24 hours, there's been reports from, I think it was NPR, I forget who was reporting on it, but they were saying that Pete Hegseth is, like, they are looking for a replacement for Pete Hegseth. Well, if the New York Times article is accurate, which I tend to believe it is because of the smear pieces that are coming out about Hegseth over the past 24, 48 hours, is that Hegseth was one of the guys, as a Secretary of Defense, who's saying, let's not bomb the nuclear facilities. Let's give, negotiations and diplomacy a chance. Suddenly, within a week of that, there's a bunch of reports about how, he's, the signal chat and this and that, and he's been messaging the Yemeni strike details to his wife or his girlfriend or whatever. It's like, all right, maybe that's all true. I don't even know. Obviously, how could I know? But if it is true that he's one of the roadblocks to bombing Iran, well, I'm going to get his back because I don't really care about, state secrets when it comes to a illegal, unconstitutional, undeclared war in Yemen. Like, that's something that shouldn't be happening. So, like, I'm not saying Hegseth's my guy. I'm not saying he's anti-war. I'm saying he's an ally in this moment. If it's true that he's actually a roadblock to bombing Iran, well, I'm going to get his back. Because guess what? Trump ain't going to replace him with a less war-friendly guy, right? Like, do you think that the media is circling the wagon? And it's not just been Hegseth, by the way. It's been, I think, 2 or 3 of his assistants, his high-level assistants, have also been under investigation and getting kicked out too. So, and here's the crazy thing: it was Waltz, the security advisor, who's the one who put Goldberg, the reporter, in the original group chat where all of this information was transmitted. Why is Waltz not the one being kicked out? Why are the news organizations not pushing to see Waltz evicted? It's all about Hegseth. Well, guess what? According to the New York Times reporting, it was Waltz and Rubio who were like, bombs away, baby. And Hegseth was like, I don't think so. And they're like, oh, well, guess what? Now all of our, top-notch investigative reporters, aka propagandists over at WAPO or New York Times, are going to, sink you. So I think that's the real danger that we're facing. And just to show you that maybe I'm not a crazy person, here's another thing that Bret Weinstein said today. Hypothesis: the U.S. is being steered into war with Iran, a reboot of a plan from the 90s that was shelved when the Iraq quagmire discredited the architects. For a reboot to work, the alternative media space must be controlled, hence the battle over Joe Rogan and standards. Bingo. Now, I'll be the first to admit, pure confirmation bias. That's my hypothesis. But I just like it when I see someone else who I trust, who I respect, who I think has a good analytical mind, come to the same kind of general hypothesis that I've come to. And I think that if you're, as I said in the prior episode, like, I'm connecting some dots here. This is not definitive, but I think we're all kind of sensing it. Like, the war drums, they do be a beaten, and suddenly there's this big cancel mob that's out to get someone like Dave Smith, who normally is dismissed. I mean, if you remember, Ben Shapiro would be talking about Dave without bringing him up. By the way, Douglas Murray went on Bill Maher. They talked about the debate, mentioned Joe Rogan a bunch of times, never once mentioned Dave's name. So he's kind of like this Voldemort figure where everybody knows who he is, but no one wants to say his name, which I love because I'm like, they're talking shit about my friend. But it's just indicative of how powerful what he's doing and what he has to say is, in my opinion, because it's like they can't contend with his arguments. They sit there, they try, they fail, and then the only like respite that they get is to go on to corporate media outlets that Dave doesn't have access to, and then to shit talk him. And they're like, "We win. Just pat ourselves on the back." It's like, well, actually, within the fire, you couldn't contend, and I think that this is a much bigger trend. The comedic world is what's now adopting this as a consequence, in my opinion, in part because of what Dave's doing. Listen to what Andrew Schulz had to say.
The state of Israel is the single greatest guarantor. Israel serves as an example over the course of the last year for the rest of Western civilization.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
It's crazy.
So wait, is the Daily Wire an American media platform or is it an Israeli media platform? if the rule is, I'm just saying, if the rule is you cannot be critical, because he has no problem being very critical of America.
Yep.
He's critical of the left in America. Left is half the country. You have no problem eviscerating half of the country, but you can't criticize Israel as a country. That's just another country, unless you're saying, and you're clearly admitting, that the Daily Wire is an arm of the Israeli propaganda machine. Is that? Oof. Are you manipulating the religious right in America so that you could take all their money and then in the process restricting free speech, one of the core tenets of the American identity? Ben.
Oof. Benjamin.
What is happening? There's trouble in paradise.
It's one thing when you have Nick Fuentes or Ryan Dawson or some of those figures that are talking like that. It's a totally different thing when you have a bunch of guys with like a dozen Netflix specials that are saying this to the audience of millions that are dominant on YouTube, dominant in the comedy space, dominant in the podcast world, like massively influential. And the reason that they're saying it, I don't think it's because it's increasingly popular, though Dave is certainly popularizing it, but because these guys are just truth tellers. Like, they're just interested in the truth. And it just becomes obvious. Like, Ben Shapiro is a gifted speaker, but when you espouse something and then you do something that's contradictory, or you say something that's contradictory to some of the other foundational things that you've laid out, people start to notice it. They go, hey, you sure? You sure that you're like really ride or die for America? Because I'm not getting that vibe from you, homeboy. Like, what are you talking about? And I think that's why Tim Dillon and Andrew Schulz, all of these guys, by the way, are friends with Dave and Rogan. And it's like, this is a trend that they are very fucking disturbed by. And I don't blame them. If I was on that side of the battle lines, I'd be disturbed too. But I personally am thrilled about it, because this is the debate that we ought to be having. And honestly, we ought to be having it in what I think is a much more respectable fashion, where you actually sit down and you actually debate someone like Dave Smith, or Scott Horton for that matter. Like, they're not going to run away from it. So take them on. And even when Dave's not there, Rogan's saying stuff like this.
Israel's going to go into Palestine. They're already bombing, and it's all. Their world is killing people. Their world is controlling resources, and it's not. They don't play fair. Like, they release stories that aren't true. They use disinformation to switch narratives. They have social media posts that aren't real so they can get people riled up about certain things. And then they're also coordinating military attacks. That's their world. We just don't think about that world because we're not in that world. But people have been in that world since the beginning of time. What they've done with us is they've sheltered us in such a way, and then censored all the mainstream media in such a way that they completely controlled the narrative.
So obviously it's having a lasting impact on Rogan, and even when Dave Smith isn't there, or Candace Owens, or whoever else, he's going to continue to have these ideas in his mind. And if you have someone that comes in there that's aggressively pro-war, he's gonna fire back. He's going to be thinking about these things. And that's powerful. And this is why I think it's so important that we kind of circle the wagons and defend Dave and defend Rogan in this moment. Not that they need a ton of defense, because I think that they'll be fine, but just to like be in the fight alongside them. And it's not, you don't always have to debate. You don't always have to be serious. Just taking the piss out of these guys is kind of a good way to defeat them, which is what Rogan and Tim Dillon did yesterday. Check it out.
Have you been there?
Right, that's a good point.
You haven't been?
By the way, how is he in all these wars? Can I just go to wars? By the way, how are you allowed to just go to wars? Is that the way
you should at least
can you just
have the
go to
courtesy of going there.
Can I just go to wars, or do I have to come back and say what people want me to say about the wars? Can I go to the wars and have my own opinions, or do I have to have the opinions?
Not if you want to go back.
That's right. I like the idea of going to a war and then coming back having a very black and white view.
Yes, I've been there.
I get it, and I know, and interesting. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I love that.
You feel better than the other people.
Well, of course, there's a lot of people. It gets very murky. Most people I know that have been to war have a very murky, complex view of things. but it is good to go to a war and then come back and be as sure as you were before you came.
You don't have to go for very long.
No, you go for an hour.
Couple hours.
It's a lunch.
So as I told you guys at the very end of my last episode, I had it on good authority that Rogan was aware of what was happening and he was not taking it kindly. Well, I was right. That's why he's taking the piss out of Douglas Murray, and rightfully so. They don't like the condescension. These are fucking red, white, and blue Americans, ladies and gentlemen. They like open dialogue. They like genuine arguments and good faith arguments. And Murray failed on all accounts. And now you've got Tim Dillon, Rogan, a bunch of other people that are going to be taking the piss out of him. I mean, honestly, Douglas Murray is a well-known figure, but I'm not sure that he will ever be better known for anything than "Have you been there?" Like, that is that is not going to leave him. That's going to stick to him like glue. And that's beautiful. Like, that's how you actually kind of rip the veneer off of these fucking fraudulent propagandist people. I think Tim Dillon's point at the end of that is so brilliant. Most of the people I know that have been to war have a very nuanced view of it, you know. And if you talk to military veterans, most of them, even if they went in, you know, gung-ho, and they come out still confident about what they did there, they still have a very different view from before and after. Like, to a man, they all have a different perspective on what transpired. And a big percentage of them have a perspective that goes, yeah, I think we got lied to, man. I think a bunch of that was a fucking lie. And I think that some of them also feel as if what they did was not a good thing. A lot of the libertarians that are military veterans feel that way. So I know a lot of those people. I'm not just making it up. And I think Tim Dillon's point is well taken that, you know, Douglas Murray's been to Gaza, he's been to Ukraine. But if you actually talk to the people on the front lines, the Ukrainian soldiers that are trying desperately not to get, you know, black bagged and thrown in a van and then put on the front line with a clock ticking as to how long they're going to exist on this earth. Yeah, it's a very different thing from the way Douglas Murray talks about it. And I think, as I've demonstrated in the prior episode, the reason for that is that he is a paid propagandist. That's my opinion. Can't prove it, but sitting on a NGO in Tel Aviv, I don't know, Dougie. I don't know, buddy boy. And one other little bit of insight for you guys. I don't know if I should be talking about this, but I'm going to, because I just say whatever's on my mind. There is a serious effort to get people of influence to Israel. And I think probably some of you are already aware of this, but being in this world that I'm in now, I've seen it firsthand. I have seen figures. I'm not going to name any names because I'm not trying to like burn bridges, but people I know have been, and talking to other people that I know right in front of me, have invited them to go to Israel, to tour it. The obvious intention with that is that, well, you kind of get the Douglas Murray treatment. You go there, it's like all expenses paid. You get to have the time of your life. They give you a very curated view of everything. And then you come back, and then when people start to ask you, like, how do you feel about Israel? Israel's fucking great, man. I had an incredible vacation there. This is not to say that Israel's not a great place. Maybe it is. I haven't been. But there's an obvious influence and propaganda campaign that has been being ran for decades across Hollywood, music industry, and now the podcast world. And I'm talking about podcasters. I just want to be very clear. These are podcasters that are basically advised or offered or gifted these trips to go there, with the expectation that they're going to come back and they're going to give more favorable coverage to that country. And I don't know about you, but if the CCP was hitting up Joe Rogan and saying, "Hey, buddy, want to bring you into Shanghai? I'm going to give you an all expenses paid, trip. We're going to have a bunch of attractive ladies that'll meet you when you get off the plane, and we're going to go to the clubs and we're going to do this and that, and then yeah, just have a good one." You'd be like, "Why are you doing that?" Right? You're like, why the fuck are you doing that? It's like, well, the answer is obvious. It's because they want you to speak positively about their country to your enormous American audience and basically serve as an arm of their propaganda campaign against the domestic population. Could it be any more fucking obvious? That's what's happening. So yeah, that happens. In this world, that happens. And I think you should know that. So when you see guys that are talking out of what seems to contrast with some of their prior espoused beliefs, and then when it comes to that one country, they just go, "Oh, not that one, though." There's a reason. And I think you ought to be paying attention to it. And maybe changing your opinion on the people that don't speak to you honestly and in a consistent, logical fashion. Because when you start to sense that someone is not being rational and logical on every issue, when it comes to this one issue, there might be an underlying reason. And I've just told you what it is.
You have anything nice to say about Israel?
I'm waiting for the money. I texted Barry Weiss. I go, here's the way this game works. I get a little bit of money first. If Israel said to a fundamentalist Christian, if Netanyahu called Mike Huckabee and said, we're going to have to nuke Iran, he'd go, let's do it.
That's what Jesus wants.
Let's do it. That's what Jesus would want, a nuclear war. So that's where we've got
Jesus wants us to use the nukes. And as soon as it's ideological, you can justify anything. This is how Americans are justifying, well, let's use these people as human shields. Like, they'll say things like that. Like, it's a way you can justify mass murder.
Yeah.
It's a way you can justify anything.
So I wasn't making it up. Tim Dillon just confirmed it right there. Barry Weiss is, a friend of his, but sounds as if she's probably been offering to give him a trip over to Tel Aviv too. And he's like, nah, I need that money first. I think he's kidding about that. But I just wanted to point out, influential people, actors, comedians, whatever, musicians, politicians, y'all get a free trip. And we all expect something in return, don't we? We're not doing it for fucking just good of our heart. I doubt that. I saved it for the end because I know most of you will just shut the show off as soon as I start playing this. But Sam Harris had on Douglas Murray today, and this is what they had to say.
Dave Smith's non-expertise is a complete failure to appreciate the reality of jihadism and just what Israel is actually dealing with in Hamas.
I believe that it's also a strain of anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism, which is a belief that nobody in the world can do something wrong and bad unless we have somehow pushed them to it.
That's not at all my belief. I'm not going to speak for every libertarian and Dave or anybody else, but I'll just say I am not a fan of radical jihad. Do I need to say that? I guess I'll say it, but it should kind of go without saying. But here's the issue, though. And this is factually true. The Israelis and the American intelligence community, Pentagon, State Department, have uplifted the more radical elements of Islam time and time again as part of the clean break memo. Like, this is what they were doing tactically. So the fact that they then turn around and use this as a reason that we need to be as Islamophobic as possible is not rational, and it leaves out a very big factor, which Dave would immediately fire at him if they were debating this issue right now, is that it's not to say that there is no evil that's done across the rest of the world that isn't a direct response to the American empire. That's obviously nonsense. But it's also nonsense to pretend as if there is no impact from American foreign policy. I mean, how many democratically elected leaders have been toppled by our intelligence community, if not our Pentagon, over the past 50 years? It's astronomical. It's like dozens and dozens and dozens. So, yeah, there's a big impact. And if you're going to continue to topple people's leadership, at some point they're going to get really upset with you and they might do fucking crazy stuff. So you have to include both sides of that. Yes, there is an organic ideology that I'm not fond of, and also there are actions that contribute to that ideology taking hold and growing.
There's a profound and deep anti-Americanism which I cannot sign up for and will not. Profound anti-Westernism. I completely reject this, and I reject it for many reasons. But one is that riding shotgun with the claim that only the West, only America can lead anyone to do bad things is what you rightly identify, Sam, as the utter inability to recognize that some people seek utterly different things than we do.
That line at the end is just mystifying to me. I mean, certainly the non-interventionist libertarians are not egalitarian. We do not believe that all cultures are equal. And there are certainly cultures across the world that I am not fond of, and that would brutalize me if they had the opportunity to. So that's not the point. All I'm arguing is I don't want to be at war with them. They're 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 miles away. So we can have that difference of opinion and difference of belief or faith or cultural framework or anything else. It's not relevant to me. It might be relevant if your primary concern is Israel, then it might be relevant, but it ain't relevant to me. I'm an American, and I'm far the fuck away from there. So why am I funding this? Right? But here's the part that really drives me nuts. And this is a consistent retort that libertarians, non-interventionists broadly receive all the time, is that we are un-American, that we are not fond of America, that we hate America. Like, couldn't be further from the truth. I love this country. I love the cultural framework. I love the ideologies that founded this country. I love the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. A lot of libertarians get mad at me for that because it's a dead document and it's not worth the fucking parchment it was written on. I get it. I'm just saying the ideas are beautiful. Like, you have to acknowledge that those ideas are beautiful. So I love this country. I just very, very clear about that. What I don't love is some of the actions of my government. I love America. I love Americans. I don't love my government all the time. Rarely, in fact. Almost never. And especially when it comes to foreign policy. It's been disastrous. And it has devastated what I love about America. The constant expenditures, blood and treasure that has gone into policing the world and dominating the world has been to the detriment of the domestic population, to our cultural framework. So much of this that we lament when it comes to our cultural breakdown is a consequence of the warfare, of the empire. Do you think that, Europe's a great example of this, which Douglas Murray has no capacity for self-reflection. He has advocated for every war, the toppling of Gaddafi in Libya and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Gaddafi in Libya in particular was like the linchpin that prevented African migration into Europe. As soon as he was gone, it was a deluge. And then he writes books talking about the deluge of immigrants and how this has to stop. Motherfucker, you created it. They weren't all trying to get to Europe before that. They are because you destroyed their country. Dumb. Central banking, the inflation has made it so that we can't have one parent staying home with their kids. It's hurt our opportunities and our chances of buying a home, starting a family, having a cohesive family unit, which creates kind of a foundational building block for a good cultural framework. All of this has been damaged, not just for empire, but by central banking. But the central banking is the prerequisite for the empire, and therefore they all tie into one another. Therefore, to oppose it is not to hate America, but to love it. In fact, I would argue the opposite, that if you don't hate the empire, you probably don't really love America, or at least you don't understand what is necessary for America to stay standing. If you don't agree with me on this, that's fine, but I hope you'll reflect on the points I'm making, that as a consequence of our empire building, almost 37 trillion in debt, over $1 trillion in interest per year that we're just burning, with a federal government that spends only 6 to 7 trillion, which, by the way, is more than it takes in taxes. So therefore, there's already a deficit, and then we're going to expend another $1 trillion on interest alone. At some point, this becomes totally unsustainable, and everything starts to collapse. So when people say, well, sure, the American empire has some mistakes and missteps, but would you prefer that China control the world? What about Russia? It's like, no, that's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is empire destroys your country. It does, inevitably. Sure, for a time, you get the knock-on benefits of having the reserve currency or whatever else. I'm not saying it's not without some benefit, but as a consequence of being the reserve currency, we've now exported our fiat currency abroad. Along with that went our jobs, our industry, our quality of living, and then our cultural framework starts to degrade as a consequence of that. So if China wants to take that on, have at it. It'll be their demise too. Russia wants to take it on, have at it. It'll be their demise too. Not to mention, they don't have the capacity to do it. And also, they've just watched us destroy ourselves with that same paradigm. I think that the more logical answer to this is that hopefully some empire doesn't step into the void and be this militaristic empire that we've dealt with America leading that way, but rather regional hegemons. And while we're at it, let's try and keep what made America special. Free speech, ability to defend ourselves. property rights, all things that are being jeopardized as a consequence of being an empire and working at the behest of a country that is not America, which is exactly what Douglas Murray espouses. And let me just finish by saying it's galling beyond words that a British guy who has no experience being an American. Have you ever been an American, Dougie? Have you ever been an American at all, Douglas? No, you haven't. So you're not an expert on being an American, so you can't tell me what being un-American is. Or anti-West. Fuck you. Eat shit. I ended another episode with that. I'm sorry. God. I got to come up with a better catchphrase. I really don't like that guy. We're going to get into regular news after this, I swear to God. But I think that this is a very important moment in the fact that it's circulating around a debate that matters a lot. Does America first mean America first or second? That's what's really going down here. If you're going to be passing hate speech laws and doing all sorts of things to the benefit of another country, well, then expect pushback. And don't you dare lecture me about being un-American as a consequence of that. I believe in equal treatment under the law. That's not un-American, that is American. I believe in free speech. That's not un-American, it is American. I believe in non-intervention. George Washington talked about entangling alliances. John Adams did the same. All of them. They all fucking said the same thing. If you build an empire, you will not have a republic. Choose. I'm choosing the republic. That doesn't make me un-American. How dare you? How dare you? Have you even been there? How dare you? Well, you can have your fucking fancy accent and your suits and your novels, but I'll sit here in a beanie and a t-shirt and I'll chew your non-arguments up all day long and spit them back out. Because that's being an American. If you guys enjoyed the show, want to support my work, at Liberty Lockdown on X, subscribe there. I'll follow you back. Liberty Lockdown is the show. If you want to subscribe on audio podcatchers, we're almost at 1,000 reviews, like 20 away. So if you guys can go leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, I'd really appreciate it. Spotify reviews are also helpful. So if you listen on either of those right now, please do leave a 5-star review. It's the easiest way to help with the algos. Very few shows get to 1,000 reviews, so it'd be really cool if I could hit that mark this month. And we just broke 25,000 subscribers on YouTube. We did 110,000 viewers over the past month. I only do 2 shows a week, so that's really cool. And I've never done that before, especially not with any major guests on over the past month. So this is all you guys doing. This is all you guys sharing the show, telling people, and couldn't be more appreciative. And I hope that I can continue to deliver, whatever this is, to the best of my ability. And I will. See you soon. Peace. Quick reminder before I leave, go to mypillow.com, pick up them Giza sheets, be fucking swell like Mike Lindell, get swole like, Tim Pool. MyPillow.com, promo code Lockdown. Get you some cozy, get you a big old pillow, and just remember that Clint Russell sent you. Promo code Lockdown, MyPillow.com, get you some cozy.
Are you suggesting we invited the 9/11 attack, sir?
I'm suggesting that we listen to the people who attacked us and the reason they did it. And they are delighted that we're over there because Osama bin Laden has said, I am glad you're over on our sand because we can target you so much easier. They've already now, since that time, have killed 3,400 of our men, and I don't think it was necessary.
Wendell, may I make a comment on that? That's really an extraordinary statement. It's an extraordinary statement of someone who lived through the attack of September 11. That we invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11. And I would ask the congressman to withdraw that comment and tell us that he didn't really mean that.
Congressman?
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if we were, if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
Almost every campus in America, the major ones certainly, are filled with instances like this of Jewish students being harassed.
If you stand in Britain with a Hamas flag, you should not be allowed to be free.
We should not have to put up with people marching through our streets.
You should be arrested, have your citizenship withdrawn.
They're not policing the law.
No, I understand.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have all of these videos of people inciting violence on the street.
You should not be given the right to insult and to taunt.
What's the point of having a law if you can't police?
Tell me about this emergency coalition against hate.
People are just deciding anything I don't like, I will perceive to be a crime against my particular group of people. And this is a whole industry now. It's an industry in the law. It's an industry in the police. People competing to be the most offended person. This is why we have the competition Olympics of offendedness, with people going to the police saying, I'm the most offended person. But we've got a lot more people on the side of free speech who actually loathe these censorious bullies, who loathe their priggishness, their boringness, their bullyingness, their endless vapidity and stupidity, their tendency to say that we have to educate themselves when they seem to have no knowledge at all. But it all comes down to one of the great gifts that Britain gave the world. The concept of liberty of speech is important not just because you need to know truthfully the widest possible array of arguments, but because you need to be able to find out if you yourself are in error. Clamp down on free speech, and you do not permit yourself the ability to find out when you're wrong. That's why free speech matters. It's one of Britain's great gifts to the world, and it's something that we should protect in this generation as much as those who went before us.
You got knocked the fuck out, man!
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?